A massive attack on the Russian military and oil infrastructure puts much of the country ablaze. Possible unfriendly moves between China and Russia, all in today's episode and more. Let's go. A series of drone strikes on January 14th caused damage to industrial facilities in Russia's Saratov region and the Tatarstan Republic, according to Russian official sources and local reports. Details about the targeted sites remain scarce, but explosions and fires were reported in multiple locations. An industrial facility in Engels, Saratov region, sustained damage during an overnight drone attack. Roman Busargin, governor of the region, confirmed the incident via telegram, but did not specify the affected site. Engels is located about 370 miles from the Ukrainian border and has previously seen drone-related incidents. Following the attack, local authorities placed schools on remote learning as a precaution against further strikes. Russian telegram channels reported several explosions in Engels, although the exact nature of the damage remains unclear. Additionally, flights were suspended at airports in Kazan, Kaluga, Saratov, and Tambov in response to, again, drone attacks. In Kazan, the Tatarstan Republic's capital, a drone reportedly struck the Kazan Norgsyntes plant, triggering a fire. This facility, critical to Russia's oil and chemical industry, produces pyrolysis, polyethylene, and polycarbonate. Local telegram channels suggested that the drone hit a liquefied gas storage area, igniting nearby tanks. Rustam Minikhanov, head of the Tatarstan Republic, confirmed that emergency services quickly extinguished the fire and reported no casualties or significant damage. However, videos shared online depict a large fire at an industrial site in Asinovo village near Kazan, accompanied by sounds of drones and explosions. The plant is located approximately 620 miles from the Ukrainian border. As the fight between Russia and Ukraine continues, drone and missile strikes on the Russian territory have become a new and unpleasant reality for the aggressor nation. And while Russia accuses Ukraine of conducting these strikes, there is no official confirmation from Kiev. And that adds up to secrecy and surprise in such strikes. If there is the best time to pressure Russia, then it is now. And the question does not stand if China will start a hybrid attack on Russian Federation, but when. This is an opinion that is voiced from time to time and has pure logic and historical content behind it. Let's take a closer look. With the majority of Russian troops engaged in Ukraine, President Putin has few forces left to defend the Far East. Former British Defense Minister Ben Wallace once estimated that 97% of Russia's army was tied up in Ukraine. Recent events, such as Ukraine's incursion to Kursk Oblast, where only teenage conscripts were available for defense at the start, further underscore Russia's stretched military capacity. When comparing military assets, China has an overwhelming advantage. China's million active duty ground troops far outnumber Russia's in the Far East. Its fleet of modern armored vehicles and artillery is similarly superior, making any potential conflict heavily favorable for the Chinese. And leaked Russian military documents reveal long-standing fears of a Chinese invasion of Russia's Far East, despite the current no-limits partnership between Moscow and Beijing. These war games created by Russian officers between 2008 and 2014 are obtained by the Financial Times, depict hypothetical scenarios involving China inciting unrest in eastern Russia, funding protests, and carrying out covert attacks on security infrastructure. The exercises also detail Russia's nuclear doctrine and its tactics to countering potential Chinese aggression. Experts say these drills underscore deep-rooted suspicions of Beijing within Russia's military, even as diplomatic ties between the two nations strengthened under Putin. And all this despite the partnership without borders. As stated, the borders are not marked out in this kind of explosive partnership. So we will see. And today we have Mr. Cormac Smith, our beloved guest here in our UATV studio again. Greetings.
Greetings, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really fine, just working here today. After the start of 2025, it has been quite explosive with new Kursk operation and first North Koreans being captive. And let's start with a discussion about those North Koreans. How that will influence the global politics. Maybe there will be some reaction from the reactive type of foreign policy of the United States and Europe?
Well, I don't like to be pessimistic, but I think we knew, yes, this is final proof, as a Ukrainian diplomat pointed out to me only yesterday, that North Korea is fighting alongside Putin's hordes and against Ukrainians. But we already knew this. We didn't even need this. So it's final proof. My view is that the West that when we first knew that North Koreans were being sent to fight with Russia, this really should have been a final wake up call to the West that, I mean, we have an axis of evil, and that axis of evil is Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And we know that all three of Russia's partners in that axis have been providing lethal aid to Russia to use against Ukraine's armed forces, but also Ukrainian civilians on a daily basis. And I remain very, very frustrated that we have not yet seen a more robust response from Western leaders. But we're at a very interesting juncture. Everybody is holding their breath, waiting until the 20th of January when Donald Trump will be inaugurated for the second time as US president.
And returning to Mr. Trump, I have heard an interesting idea that all this case with Greenland, with Canada, with rhetorics to shift borders is actually a move to drift off the US reactive foreign policy. So when Russia does something bad or something aggressive and then the United States react, it's kind of trying to take back the initiative to drop in something important or something very frustrating to make the world react to this. Do you think that is the case?
Look, I really don't know. We have been used to America being the world's policeman and being the leader of our rules-based international order. And while that order, that has pertained now for 80 years since the end of the Second World War and has given certainly our part of the world the greatest period of peace, prosperity, and security that we have ever known. It's imperfect, but it's far, far better than any of the options. And if we look at the options that would be provided by Putin's axis of evil in what Lavrov called back in 2017 at the Munich Security Conference, the post-West era, when he rejoiced in a speech in the breaking up, as he saw it, of the old order. If our rules-based order has one absolute immutable rule at its core, it is that you do not invade a neighbor or another sovereign democratic country simply to take what you want. And this is seemingly what President Trump is threatening to do in both Panama, Canada, and Greenland. But I think we have to take it with a very large pinch of salt. Donald Trump is famously unpredictable. And we know that he is transactional. He likes doing deals and he is a great disruptor. So personally, I don't see that he will invade either Canada or Greenland, but he says these things to knock other Western leaders off balance. He sees himself as a great deal maker. So he opens up all of his negotiations by setting the stakes very, very high. But of course, there are better, wiser, and more experienced heads than mine who cannot, with 100% certainty, predict what Donald Trump is going to do. But as I say, I believe it's part of his tactics of disruption and trying to throw all of us, not just Ukrainians, but all of us in the West, off balance, so he can ultimately get what he wants in line with his America First policy. But we wait and see.
Yeah, I already noticed too that the states in Europe have stated that they will protect the sovereignty of Greenland and the sovereignty of their states in any case, in any attempt to change the borders or change something in this combined order, because the states of Europe have really got used and are comfortable with that Ukraine is not winning this war. Ukraine just has enough to not Russia push too much into Ukraine and not to conquer it at once. So Ukraine has just enough to survive at the cost of Ukrainian soldiers' lives, of civilians' lives under all these daily shutting with Shahed and missile attacks. And this getting off balance really shows that the safe time, the calm time for Europe, as how you can say it is safe and calm because there's a war in Europe, it is over. Do you consider that?
Well, yeah, and look, there are two things that I would say to that. The day after Donald Trump was elected, in fact, I did a 45-minute interview on this channel, but I also put out a podcast where I said there may well be a silver lining for Ukraine in Donald Trump's election. And that silver lining, is to make European leaders finally wake up to the reality of the Russian threat and to realize that we need to spend an awful lot more money on our own defense. Now, Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, made a very important speech back on the 12th of December last year when he said that European members of NATO needed to spend an awful lot more. And I think the figure that he quoted at the time was 3% of gross domestic product. And he said, and I remember his words very well because he used three veries. He said, if we did not, or much, three muches, he said it would be much, much, much more expensive and costly to all European nations later. So, and I think this is part of Donald Trump's game because one of the things in my assessment, Donald Trump is going to want to pivot towards the Middle East and the Far East in particular, and he is going to expect Europe to play a much greater role in looking after the situation in Ukraine. And now, if I was to betray my own politics, I am no fan of Donald Trump, never have been. But if there is one area and one area alone that I find myself in strong agreement with Donald Trump, it is that European members of NATO and others like the Canadians have not up to now paid our fair share. Trump has made a speech recently where he has suggested that European members of NATO need to spend 5%. Again, I believe that that is his opening gambit, but that is certainly making European leaders feel very, very uncomfortable. And my assessment for the last few months has been that we probably need in Europe to settle around 3%. And there's only four European members of NATO that currently spend 3% or more. That's the three Baltic countries who are between 3 and 3.5%. And Poland, as you know, I don't know what the exact figure is, but they are somewhere, I believe, between 4.5 and 5%. So, yeah, we really need to step up. And that is a favor that Donald Trump could do us. I think that the challenge with Trump is that we keep him in the game because if he was to pull American support away from Ukraine immediately, I think the simple fact is that European nations are simply not capable at the moment of filling that gap. We did not put our industries on a war footing 2, maybe 3 years ago when we should have done. We are starting to do that now, but it takes a long time for the military industrial complex in our countries to really gear up to the sort of demands. So I think I think there's a deal to be done with Donald Trump, and I am trying to be as optimistic as I can, especially on behalf of Ukraine, but on behalf of all of us in Europe. I think there's a deal to be done, and I think that deal will settle around a commitment of 3%, which for a lot of European countries, including the UK, who's currently the largest spender outside the four nations in the eastern neighborhood that I mentioned on 2.3%. But we really need to be up around 3%. General Sir Roland Walker, who is the current head of the British Army, said only a month before Christmas, he said, the British Army is not ready to fight. And if we're not ready to fight, we're not ready to deter. And that's Britain, who has, as you know, has been at the heart of supporting Ukraine for the last 3 years. So there is a huge challenge to all of us in Europe. We can only hope that both our leaders and, of course, our populations who are badly infected with Russian disinformation narratives, wake up and realize that, there's the great myths that Russia can never be defeated. Of course, Russia can be defeated. They've been defeated in wars many times. And the other great myth that it is simply too dangerous to allow the Russian Federation to break up. The truth is, we have no control over the Russian Federation breaking up. The only thing we can do as very strong and wealthy democracies is use all our powers and our resources to prepare for that breakup. But we need to be doing that now.
Well, I've called this video "What the heck is going on with the world?" because the world order is crumbling. It is crumbling in Ukraine. It has not yet fallen. I believe that the most pessimistic scenario and the downfall of the current world order is, God forbid, the failure of Ukraine and complete occupation and disintegration of Ukraine, because it is a war to destroy the nation completely. And Patrushev just told today that in 2025 he plans to destroy Ukraine entirely. And
Mm-hmm.
the military industrial complex is a huge profitable investment. We have Nordic countries as well as Baltic countries investing hundreds of millions of dollars into Ukrainian military industrial complex at the moment, into naval drones and into missile industries, because it is far more acceptable, it is far more available to pay for Ukrainian missiles, which are new developments, as probably you have seen announced by President Zelensky, that have struck Russian cities and industrial sites yesterday, where their military plants and oil industry is resided. They have struck them yesterday, and it is much more accessible to buy Ukrainian missiles rather than buy Taurus or Scalp NATO-made missiles in a case of a big war with Russia. So domestic investments into military-industrial complex in a time of global instability and global wars all over the globe and tension is really profitable. Shouldn't people in Europe, the politics, understand this?
I could not agree with you more. And in fact, it's the great progress that we have been seeing recently with how Ukraine has been developing its own missiles, and obviously its great drone program is one of the things which gives us hope. And even if the US was to pull out all support after the 20th of January, um, I simply don't believe that Ukraine can give up, because I'm always reminded of the words of a great friend, a senior Ukrainian diplomat, a few only days after the further invasion back in 2022. He said those words, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. I mean, what more do we have? They have told us, and they have told us over and over and over again, that they want to wipe Ukraine and Ukrainian culture and national identity off the face of the earth. As another friend told me back in 2016, when I went to Kyiv first, Russia wants Ukraine without Ukrainians. I didn't get it at the time, I came to understand it very, very quick. And, this brings the other thing I'm always saying is we in the West need to see the world and Russia through Ukrainian eyes and through the eyes of the likes of the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and the Poles, who grew up with this toxic menace of a Russian empire. And we now have Putin, who obviously believed that the breakup of the USSR, the Russian Empire, was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. And he is now doing everything in his power. But the in the West, our leaders and our some very notable former diplomats and former generals are now telling us that we need to be ready to fight a war with Russia by the end of the decade. Um, we're waking up, I think, but we're waking up slowly and we are waking up late.
No, no.
And, you know, um, Russian disinformation still is too pervasive and it still has too much of a grip on people in our democratic societies who ultimately, Putin or his other cronies in the axis of evil don't have to worry about democracy. Our leaders have to worry about democracy in 4 or 5 year cycles. And that's why Russian disinformation is so powerful, and I believe we're still not doing enough to counter it because I still, every day, I hear these Russian narratives spouted by useful idiots and Kremlin assets in the West. Our people need to be, and they need to be helped by their leaders, by our leaders, need to understand what the real threat is and need to understand actually that to counter this threat, we all need to make sacrifices in the West, and those sacrifices will be in the price of our standard of living. I have a saying which I've been using for over a year, and I absolutely believe it. It's our money and guns today or our daughters and sons tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. And as we cannot give up democracy, we must figure out something. And people in the West must figure out something too, how to combat this falling apart world order. But I hope, I really have a great hope, as you said earlier, that everything will be fine. Thank you very much for being with us in our studio.
Always my great pleasure to join you guys.
Have a nice evening, Mr. Smith.
You too.
So that is it for today. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button to support the UATV channel, because it is your support that helps us deliver the news of the free world to you directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and don't let propaganda win.